Hi everyone, welcome to Historically Speaking, an online YouTube history channel focused on the history of various institutions and professionals, how history intersects with education, culture, and the world around us. I'm Karen Yang, host of Historically Speaking, and today we're here with Sarah Fling, a historian at the White House Historical Association. She came to the White House Historical Association in 2019 as a graduate public history fellow, and she joined as a historian in 2021. And she received her bachelor's degree in history from the University of Pittsburgh and her master's degree in public history from American University. And Sarah specializes in material culture in 19th century women's history. To give you guys a broader overview of the White House Historical Association, the White House Historical Association is a private, nonprofit educational organization with a mission to enhance the understanding and appreciation of the executive mansion or the White House. And it was founded by First Lady Jackie Kennedy in 1961 to help the White House collect and exhibit a lot of really great artifacts of American history and culture. And I'm just super excited to have Sarah on today and talk a lot about something I've always really been fascinated with, like the White House and the symbolism and just like how it's kind of representative of like the American people. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today for sure. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to the bio or add to the White House Historical Association's message and mission, I guess?
That was wonderful. You killed it.
Thank you so much. Then without further ado, we'll jump straight into our conversation. So as a person who's always been fascinated with the White House, I think the White House Historical Association has a really unique purpose in preserving the White House and its history. So how did the White House Historical Association throughout its history tell the story of the White House?
Definitely. That's a great question. And it's something that has certainly changed a bit over time. So,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, we were founded by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy in 1961. So, we're going on our 61st anniversary this
Oh
year.
my gosh, wow.
And when we were first founded, the goal was really to assist in preservation and acquisition of items in the collection, which the White House collection has hundreds of really impressive, fine, and decorative arts items, things
Mhm.
like portraits and sculptures and White House china, as well as all of the furniture that you see inside. But
Mhm.
I think over time, we've really tried to expand our understanding of what gets included in the White House and its
Mhm.
history.
Mhm.
Because as we always say, the White House is the people's house. And as First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy said, the White House belongs to the American people. And
Mhm.
so, really, what started with a goal of preserving objects and items for future generations has
Mhm.
grown to really include education about the history of the White House and the people that have lived and worked there.
Mhm.
Really specifically, in the last several years, we've been working to really expand who we discuss when we talk about the White House,
Mhm.
moving beyond just the presidents and first ladies and their families to
Mhm.
include workers at the White House. And in 2020, we launched our Slavery in the President's Neighborhood initiative, which really has the goal of talking about the enslaved workers who
Mhm.
built, lived, and worked at the White House. So
Mhm.
I think over time, this understanding of how we talk about White House history has become increasingly more inclusive and diverse and developed a lot over time to go beyond objects and
Mhm.
preservation to include that historical narrative and how we understand the
Mhm.
people behind the White House.
100%. And I think that, like, as a person who's really always been interested in history and seeing a lot of these different artifacts in the museum, I feel that also, like, these artifacts can also kind of convey that narrative as well, with seeing that, like, hey, maybe this was like a chair someone sat in, but this chair was used during this party, which had this kind of consequence and this kind of effect. And I think that's definitely really, really interesting for sure. And I also love how diversified and how the perspective is slowly growing in seeing that the workers and the people who also make sure that the White House is running smoothly play like a really integral part on the history and how we view the White House in its entirety as well, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think you're right in that the collection itself has also changed to
Hmm.
reflect better the
Oh,
American
wow.
people,
Hmm.
and that for so long, as is the case with so many museum collections, the
Mhm.
bulk of the White House collection was really reflective of a lot of white male artists for a long
Mhm.
time. And
Mhm.
that in the last few administrations, the
Mhm.
first ladies and the presidents have worked really closely with us, who funds a lot of these acquisitions, as well as with the Office of the Curator, to
Mhm.
diversify the actual artists who are behind the works in the White House. So
Mhm.
just in the George W. Bush administration, we saw the Jacob Lawrence painting The Builders come to the White House, which was the
Mhm.
very first piece by an African American artist. In
Mhm.
the Obama administration, we added Alma Thomas's painting Resurrection, which is one of my
Mhm.
personal favorite artists. And
Mhm.
that's the first Black woman in the collection. And
Mhm.
then just in 2019, 2020,
Mhm.
Melania Trump unveiled the first piece of art by an Asian American artist, Isamu
Mhm.
Noguchi's floor frame sculpture. So,
Mhm.
really, in the past few years, we've seen this expansion go all the way to the pieces of art that are in the
Mhm.
White House as well.
For sure. And like the perspectives and the people who have created that art and like seeing a lot of more diversification on that front as well. I think like definitely when you started talking about like art and painting, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like, what other mediums or what other artifacts does the White House Historical Association like preserve or choose to kind of keep, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the main thing that I should emphasize is that the White House collection is under the umbrella of the Office of the Curator. So all of the
Mhm.
things that we help to fund the preservation of or the acquisition of doesn't
Mhm.
belong to us, but belongs to the White House. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
those items, can range from it's a very interesting mix of items, whether it's furniture, if you go on a tour of the White House, those pieces that you would see on the ground floor and the state floor. But
Mhm.
it also includes presidential portraiture and First Lady portraiture, which is
Mhm.
probably some of the pieces that people watching at home might be most familiar with.
Mhm.
Um,
100%.
but you can also see some of the artifacts in the White House Visitor Center, which is
Mhm.
free and open to the public. It's run in tandem with the National Park Service. And in
Mhm.
there, they've also got other great items like presidential desks and telegraph keys and pieces of bricks of the White House. So,
Wow.
really, that collection can include a wide variety of items and
Mhm.
tries to be as inclusive as possible because all of these different things are indicative of the really interesting history of the White House.
100%. And I love how like just through different mediums and different like pieces, we can definitely garner a more like 3D or three-dimensional perspective of these people. And that I love how when I first thought of the White House Historical Association, I thought primarily of the house itself. And I didn't really think of like the art that people that the White House, like the members of the White House who lived there and such would have really enjoyed. And I think that's like also much more telling of their own like values and just like how we can relate to them or something else like that, which is really, really cool for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, so this is I feel like I just love talking about these artifacts for sure. What has been your personal like favorite artifact that you've like encountered or I
Ooh.
don't know, like thought about, I guess?
I would say recently I've been doing a lot of research into a very specific piece in the White House collection and wrote an article about this piece of china that's on display in the China Room. And it's a sugar bowl that was gifted to Martha Washington in the 1790s. And it's very symbolic. It has sort of Latin phrases to poke fun at King George after the
Oh my God.
Revolution, and was
Oh
used by the
wow.
Washingtons, when they're serving their meals at the president's house before the White
Mhm.
House was completed. But I think it's such an interesting artifact because in looking at it, it's just a bowl. But if you think more about this material culture behind it, it can really tell you a lot of stories, first about the production of sugar
Mhm.
in early America and the enslaved laborers who were doing a lot of this work in the
Mhm.
Caribbean. Then you can learn more about sort of the sweet tooth of early America and the consumption that was going on at places like the president's house and later at the White House. But
Mhm.
this particular piece is really interesting too because it was owned by the Washingtons and then passed down among their heirs and
Oh
ended up
wow.
at Arlington House, which then was the estate of Robert E. Lee during the Civil War.
Oh
So
my
it's
gosh.
actually confiscated, this relic of George Washington, confiscated by the Union Army after they
Oh
took
my
the
gosh.
estate from the Confederates. And so it also has this longer history that goes beyond
Hmm.
Washington's
Oh
time
my.
and can tell us about a completely different time period and America in a different way. So it's
Hmm.
just an artifact that I think can hold a lot of stories. It holds more than just the sugar, as I like to say.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, for sure. Like the changing of people who's holding these items and like I think that's so cool. Just that I can't believe that's something like George Washington encountered and like cherished and then ended up with Robert E. Lee. That's like complete, it's just like a really
Yeah.
interesting like crossover
And
kind of
I
thing.
think it's very reflective of the White House because the White House collections preservation didn't begin until the Kennedy administration. Jacqueline Kennedy founded our organization, but she also put into place making the White House a museum that's protected by Congress. And she hired the first White House curator. And before that, presidents really could sell pieces that were in the White House. There
Yeah.
were auctions on the front lawn. And
Uh-huh.
so a lot of these items that were in the White House in the 19th century changed hands so many times. And several of them really have been lost to history because
For
there wasn't
sure.
a designated caretaker. So I think
For
that
sure.
this is just one example of many where they've passed through so many hands and there's so many stories behind these pieces.
100%. I think like I've always had like a fascination with these presidents and like they're kind of like not maybe not necessarily so much their policy, but also them just as people. And I remember just like reading all of these stories of, oh yeah, like someone needed to pay off a debt or something, and like, oh, let's go on to China, like you can say bye to that. And like I think that's super interesting that potentially someone out there has this piece of China or something that just has this incredible story that we may not even be 100% aware about. And I think like that's what makes this like whole entire preservation of like just like this process so cool as well, in terms of just diving into that story and uncovering that story and making it much more public for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think like this other question has to do more with the method of like storytelling and history. So how has the White House Historical Association's like method of storytelling or like this idea of education changed over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that in the past several years, we've really focused on honing in our storytelling and our use of education. In 2010, we had a very generous donation from David Rubenstein to form the David M. Rubenstein National Center for White House History. And
Mhm.
that's what our historian team is a part of. And we really consider that the educational hub for the association. So, in
Mhm.
addition to the historians, our education team is there working with K-12 students and teachers, as well as our digital library team. And
Mhm.
I would emphasize like a few things that we really do to bring people in to learn more about White House history and get the
Mhm.
masses interested beyond the history work that we do. Our education team works really hard to create classroom resources that
Mhm.
students can use, that teachers can rely on. And they also hold the annual White House History Teacher Institutes, where
Mhm.
they train teachers, they bring them to Washington, D.C., and talk to them about how to integrate this story of the White House into curriculum because
Mhm.
the White House isn't designated, it's not required to teach about it in your
Mhm.
curriculum like you might
For
be
sure.
required to learn about the American Revolution. And so
Mhm.
they do a lot of great work in that way. And then our
Mhm.
digital library team has been working to digitize thousands of photos and
Mhm.
documents related to the White House to make them available for the public. So I
Mhm.
think it's really following in this public history and museum trajectory of relying on education teams and interpretation as well
Mhm.
as digital history to really bring these stories to life. And
Mhm.
because we don't have a physical museum and we are not directly
Mhm.
in the White House, that
Mhm.
digital realm is really important for us.
For sure. I actually recently spoke with a couple of other like digitally based museums, like the National Women's History Museum.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure. And like I think the idea of like having a really digital presence and having a lot of different programs available online um gives like museums a lot of really unique power in terms of being able to like stretch across like state borders, stretch across like to people from different parts of the globe, in parts of the country, of course, as well. And I think that's super interesting using like education. And like as a current, I'm currently taking a push right now, like AP US history.
Love it.
And I think like we aren't required to study the White House, but kind of just like I feel like it's always been a really good place to kind of base off of in terms of like context, in terms of just like the people of that time period. And every so often, I've just kind of like, oh, what's going on in the White House? Or like, who's in the White House? What are they doing there? And I definitely think that the White House Historical Association like really furthers that kind of message and that kind of relatability, which is really important for sure.
Definitely. We always say that anything that you want to learn about American history and sometimes global history, you can find a way to connect it to the White House because
Mhm.
there's, whether it's a president or a first lady and something they're doing, or visitors to the White House from around the globe, or things that are being protested in the park outside, there's really some connection somewhere. So it's such a great way to center yourself in history. And you're
100%.
right that those digital platforms, especially after the pandemic, have been so helpful in making history accessible for everybody.
For sure. And I think that having this idea of just like this website that kind of like, as we say all the time, like, oh, something on the internet kind of exists forever. And in this case, that's really, really awesome in terms of being able to provide a lot of great resources for people from around the world. One more question, I guess this kind of circles back to the idea of the artifacts. These artifacts are so cool. Um, so what's the kind of the process for determining if an artifact is like relevant or if it deserves like more research or like preservation, I guess?
So that's a great question. And honestly, a lot of those early decisions take place in the office of the curator.
Hmm.
So, for example, if there's a object that really needs preservation, there's a governing body called the Committee for the Preservation of the White House. This was
Hmm.
also created in the wake of the Kennedy administration, and
Hmm.
Mrs. Kennedy's push for preservation of the White House, then solidified in an executive order by Lyndon B. Johnson. But the Committee for the Preservation of the White House really draws from a lot of really great scholars. So it
Hmm.
includes the White House curator, but it also includes the director of the National Gallery of Art, the
Wow.
secretary of the Smithsonian, other really important figures. And
Hmm.
so they are the body that sort of votes on these really important ideas of preservation.
Hmm.
A good example is that recently it was a very long project, almost a decades long project to preserve a suite of furniture in the Blue Room, the Belanger suite, and it had really fallen into disrepair. And so
Hmm.
we helped to fund that, but it was based on recommendations from the curator's office and the Committee for the Preservation of the White House.
Hmm.
But when it comes to deciding what we want to research more deeply, that's something that I love about my job, and that the historians really get a chance to discover what they're most interested in. And
Hmm.
so we, of course, are assigned things and we have research that we do based on the time of year or events that are coming up. But we
Hmm.
also have the liberty to research things that are really interesting to us.
Hmm.
So material culture is something that I'm particularly interested in and something that I studied in graduate school. So I am more driven and interested in studying some of those artifacts than some of my
Hmm.
colleagues who are more interested in politics or other
Hmm.
things. So we make a great team in that we all have our sort of niche interests and we're able to pursue them on our own time
Hmm.
through our career.
That is so cool for sure. I think like um with that idea of just like being able to pursue your interest for sure. I think that just like because you're interested in it, someone else who's like watching from home or someone else in the country is definitely probably interested in that as well. And being able to kind of just like look through these different things, find what you're interested in, find its relevant history is definitely so important for sure as well. That.
Definitely. And I would just say
Mhm.
one more thing, which is that in studying objects,
Mhm.
for so long, the way they've been sort of expressed or the way that people have talked about art in is often very boring and dry, and
Yeah, for
in
sure.
trying to look at them in different ways. And I think the way that so many historians and museum professionals now are bringing in these stories of the people behind them or the way that
Mhm.
they were used, and this of course is at the heart of material culture. It's really illuminating them in new ways. So that's one of the things that excites me most about the work that we've done, is that we're always finding ways to make history more interesting than it has been previously, and get
Mhm.
people out of that idea that it's dusty old textbooks that I'm not really interested in. It can be so much more, and it can be so engaging if you find the right story to tell.
100%. And I think like the stories behind these artifacts and the people behind them and seeing them and kind of come to real life and come to life with these items are so important for sure. And that, yeah, for sure, like I think a lot of people, especially my age, kind of view history as, oh, it's like all in the past, like why do we need to revisit it, like the future is now, like we should look to the future, develop a lot of these things. But I think in order to kind of understand where we want to go as to the future, we have to look at the past and see the mistakes we've made, see like the things we've valued and whether or not that's really benefited us. And I think the White House Historical Association does a great job of that for sure.
Very well said.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm like just super passionate about this. And I think definitely your job as a historian, being able to research some certain just like subjects that you really like, that's so cool for sure. That's pretty much the end of our conversation today. Is there anything else you'd like to add or anything else you'd like to say or anything else like that?
No, but it's so exciting to talk about something that energizes people, and I'm so glad to know that you are so interested in the field, and that um, we just need to encourage more students to see the value
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
studying history and how exciting and interesting it can be and how enlightening it can be. And so it's very refreshing to hear you
For
say that.
sure. Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of times we just think it's like, oh, this year happened, this like this thing happened, or oh, someone fought a war with someone. But we need to take a step back and see like the human aspect of that and see that we're so much more than just the year or the statistic, but that there were stories behind this and like leading up to that and the consequences of everything for sure.
Absolutely.
100%. Um, that's it for today then. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone watching at home as well. And I'll see you in the next video.